There is a kind of inflammation that doesn't burn on the surface, doesn't create obvious redness, and doesn't announce itself with dramatic symptoms. It works quietly, deep inside the body, slowly altering the way your organs move, respond, and communicate. It shows up not as a sharp pain, but as a heaviness in the stomach after eating, not as a fever, but as the feeling that your digestion has become sluggish and unreliable. Not as a wound you can see, but as discomfort you can't quite explain. Bloating that seems to appear out of nowhere, pressure sitting low in the abdomen, and bowel movements that feel harder than they should. Most people blame the meal they ate, a stressful day, or the simple passage of time. But what they're actually feeling is something far more complex. A slow-burning inflammation that begins in the gut, moves through the tissues, and eventually changes the way digestion works. It's silent enough to go unnoticed for months, sometimes years, but powerful enough to disrupt the natural rhythm of the digestive system and overload the veins that sit at the base of the pelvis. And when that happens, digestion doesn't just slow down, it begins to strain. The intestines push harder, pressure builds from within, and even the veins around the rectum start to feel the impact, making hemorrhoids flare more easily and more intensely. This inflammation has a real cause, not a vague explanation, not a guess, but a physiological process that science understands clearly. It doesn't begin with food itself, but with what food does to the gut lining when the body is overwhelmed. It starts when the microbiome becomes imbalanced, when the intestinal barrier becomes irritated, and when the bloodstream begins to carry signals of stress from one area of the body to another. And once this process begins, digestion no longer operates the way it used to. Meals sit heavier, the intestines move slower, gas becomes trapped, internal pressure builds, and the entire system shifts out of sync. If you've noticed that your digestion feels stuck, that your stomach reacts differently than before, or that pressure and discomfort appear more often than they used to, you're about to understand why. And if you've seen your hemorrhoids worsen on the days when your digestion feels the most sluggish, that connection is not accidental. It's mechanical, biological, and completely explainable. Before we go deeper, take a moment to subscribe to Relief Health. Every week we share videos that help you understand your body clearly and regain control of your health in a real, practical way. Now that you know where the story begins, let's uncover how this inflammation actually starts inside you, long before the symptoms become obvious. Silent inflammation never starts with a dramatic moment. It begins quietly, in the microscopic spaces that line your gut, long before you ever feel that your digestion is slowing down. Inside the intestines, a thin and intelligent barrier forms the first line of defense between the outside world and your bloodstream. This lining is made of cells that fit together like tightly sealed tiles, deciding what should enter your body and what should stay out. But when the gut becomes irritated by stress, low-fiber diets, processed foods, irregular sleep, or repeated episodes of constipation, these tiles start to separate just enough for trouble to begin. Tiny gaps open between the cells, too small to see but large enough to allow particles to slip through. Proteins that shouldn't reach the bloodstream begin to cross over. Small fragments of bacteria, normally harmless when kept inside the gut, suddenly appear where they don't belong. And when the immune system detects these intruders, it doesn't explode into a full allergic reaction. Instead, it activates a continuous low-level response. This is the beginning of silent inflammation, not loud, not painful, but persistent and deeply influential. At the same time, the gut microbiome, the diverse community of bacteria that helps digest food, regulate hormones, and protect immunity, begins to shift. Beneficial species decrease. More aggressive or inflammatory species increase. And as the microbiome becomes imbalanced, digestion loses some of its efficiency. Food that once moved smoothly through the intestines now lingers, breaks down more slowly, and ferments more than it should. Fermentation produces gas, and gas expands the intestines from within, stretching them gently but constantly. This internal pressure irritates the gut lining even more, creating a vicious cycle. Inflammation disrupts the microbiome worsens inflammation, and together they slow digestion. At the same time, the bloodstream begins carrying signals from this inflamed region to other parts of the body. The circulatory system, which depends on smooth, unrestricted flow, becomes affected. The veins that drain the digestive tract begin to work harder to move blood upward against gravity. But inflamed veins don't move blood efficiently. They swell, stiffen, and allow pressure to build. And here is where silent inflammation becomes more than just a digestive issue. The pelvic veins, the same veins that surround the rectum, feel this pressure directly. When the gut is inflamed, blood flow slows. When blood flow slows, pressure rises. And when pressure rises, hemorrhoidal veins begin to swell even before symptoms appear. It's a chain reaction that starts far away from the rectum, but ends exactly where many people eventually feel pain, burning, and irritation. All of this happens long before the first sign of discomfort, long before the first episode of constipation, long before you realize your digestion has changed. Silent inflammation prepares the ground quietly, piece by piece, until the entire digestive system begins to move differently. Now that we've uncovered where this inflammation starts, it's time to explore the next step, how this same process disrupts digestion so deeply that it feels like your entire system has slowed or even stopped. Once silent inflammation takes hold inside the gut, digestion doesn't simply slow down. It becomes disorganized. The very rhythm that moves food through your body begins to lose its coordination. The intestines rely on a precise wave-like motion called peristalsis, a synchronized series of contractions that gently push food from one section to the next. But inflammation interferes with the nerves and muscles that generate those waves. Instead of moving smoothly, the intestines begin to tighten at the wrong moments and relax when they should be working. It becomes a system out of sync. You feel this as a fullness that sits in the upper abdomen long after eating. Meals that once felt light now feel heavy. Food lingers in the stomach because the next section of the digestive tract isn't ready to receive it. Gas that would normally pass unnoticed becomes trapped, stretching the intestines and creating a pressure that radiates forward, upward, and downward. This pressure makes the abdomen feel tight and distended, and each breath seems slightly less free. As the inflammation spreads into deeper layers of the gut wall, your body begins absorbing water from the stool more aggressively. The result is a slower, drier, harder transit. Stools that move with difficulty require more effort to pass and irritate the anal canal along the way. The discomfort people describe as constipation is not just about infrequency, it's the struggle of pushing against resistance created by inflammation itself. And while all of this is happening inside the digestive tract, another process is unfolding just beneath the surface. The intestines sit on top of a dense network of veins that carry blood away from the digestive organs and back toward the heart. These veins are designed to handle pressure gently, but when the intestines swell from inflammation or gas, they press downward onto those veins, slowing blood flow. Blood begins to accumulate instead of circulating freely, and the entire pelvic region starts to bear the load of this internal congestion. This is why the discomfort doesn't stay only in the stomach. The pressure created in the gut is transmitted directly downwards. The pelvic floor, a group of muscles meant to support the organs, tightens automatically in response. It's the body's instinctive attempt to stabilize what feels heavy and swollen. But that tightening doesn't relieve pressure. It increases it. It compresses the anal canal, stiffens the rectum, and narrows the space through which stool must pass. The combination of slow transit, harder stools, trapped gas, and pelvic tension creates a perfect scenario for painful bowel movements. And it's in these moments that hemorrhoids begin to react. When blood is already congested and the tissue is already swollen, every small strain adds another layer of pressure. What begins as mild inflammation in the gut transforms into burning, swelling, and irritation in the veins around the rectum. This is why so many people say the same thing. My digestion feels stuck, and on those days, my hemorrhoids get worse. It isn't imagination. It's anatomy. It's physiology. It's the natural outcome of inflammation interfering with systems that were designed to work in harmony. Now that you understand how inflammation disrupts digestion on a deep mechanical level, we can finally step into the next part, how this same inflammation directly worsens hemorrhoids and keeps the cycle repeating. As digestion slows and pressure builds inside the abdomen, the inflammation that began quietly in the gut reaches the veins surrounding the rectum. These veins, the hemorrhoidal plexus, are delicate structures designed to cushion the anal canal and help maintain control during bowel movements. Under normal circumstances, they expand and contract easily, managing subtle changes in internal pressure. But when inflammation is present, their behavior changes completely. The blood vessels become irritated from the inside. The endothelial lining, the smooth inner surface of the veins, loses its elasticity and becomes swollen. When that lining swells, the passageway for blood narrows. Blood arrives in the hemorrhoidal veins normally, but it has a harder time leaving. It pools, it stagnates, it stretches the surrounding tissue, making the area feel heavier, more sensitive and more reactive than usual. At the same time, the intestinal pressure created by slow digestion pushes downward, compressing the pelvic veins. This compression acts like a hand squeezing a soft tube. The flow slows to a crawl, and the blood that should circulate upward becomes trapped. The veins swell more, the tissue stretches further, and what was once a mild irritation turns into throbbing discomfort. As the intestines struggle to move stool forward, the pelvic floor responds by tensing. It's an instinctive protective response, an attempt to hold everything in place while the gut feels distended. But this tension works against the body. A contracted pelvic floor compresses the rectal canal, leaving less space for stool to pass. And when stool finally moves through that narrowed space, it rubs against the swollen tissue, aggravating the veins even more. Each bowel movement becomes a moment of high pressure, the intestines pushing from above, the pelvic floor tightening from below, the blood trapped in inflamed veins. This combination transforms a simple, natural process into something painful and exhausting. Even soft stools can cause irritation when the tissue is already swollen. Hard stools make the situation dramatically worse, scraping against the inflamed area and triggering spasms that can linger long after the bowel movement is over. Over time, this cycle of inflammation, pressure, congestion becomes self-reinforcing. The more the veins swell, the more easily they become irritated. The more they're irritated, the more the pelvic muscles tighten. The more the muscles tighten, the harder the bowel movement becomes. The harder the bowel movement, the greater the pressure on the hemorrhoidal veins. What began as gut inflammation, invisible, quiet and unobserved, has now reached the point where the symptoms are impossible to ignore. Burning, swelling, bleeding, a sensation of fullness or heaviness that doesn't go away. And the worst part, the feeling that every time digestion slows, the symptoms come back stronger. Understanding this connection is powerful. It reveals that hemorrhoids don't worsen randomly. They react to internal conditions created by inflammation long before the symptoms reach the anal canal. And when you recognize that pattern, you can begin to break it. In the next section, we're going to explore that cycle, the loop that keeps inflammation alive, and how everyday habits, without you noticing, fuel the process day after day. Once inflammation settles into the gut and the veins around the pelvis, the body enters a loop that becomes incredibly difficult to break. It's a cycle that doesn't begin with pain but ends with it. A cycle that forms slowly, quietly, one reaction triggering the next until digestion, circulation and bowel movements all become part of the same struggle. It starts with the gut. Inflammation weakens the intestinal lining and disrupts the microbiome, slowing digestion and allowing gas and waste to build up. This creates pressure inside the abdomen, a kind of internal weight that presses downward with every hour that passes. The body senses this weight and tries to compensate by tightening the pelvic floor, pulling upward, in an attempt to support what feels heavy and unsettled. But that tension works like a locked door, making it harder for stool to pass and increasing the strain required to move it. The extra strain forces more blood into the veins around the rectum, but because those veins are already inflamed, they cannot release that blood efficiently. It becomes trapped, stretching the tissue further and making the area ultra-sensitive. The swelling grows, the burning intensifies, and the discomfort becomes a constant reminder that something deeper is happening inside the body. At the same time, The slowed digestion changes the way the intestines handle water. Stool becomes drier and harder, which means the next bowel movement demands even more effort. That effort pushes more pressure downward, tightens the pelvic floor further, and traps even more blood in the hemorrhoidal veins. Every attempt to evacuate becomes another turn of the wheel, another push that reinforces the inflammation. And outside the digestive system, everyday habits quietly pour fuel on the fire. A night of poor sleep raises inflammatory hormones. A stressful moment tightens the gut and slows its movement. Sitting for long periods compresses pelvic circulation. Eating too quickly irritates the stomach. Small actions, none of them dramatic, keep adding little sparks to a flame that should have gone out long ago. The body ends up living in a pattern it never intended to maintain. Slow digestion leads to pressure. Pressure leads to congestion. Congestion leads to swelling, and swelling triggers more inflammation. It becomes a loop in which each element strengthens the next, turning a single irritation in the gut into a widespread problem that affects the entire lower digestive system. Many people begin to feel as though their body is betraying them, as though every meal becomes heavier. Every bowel movement becomes a challenge, and every flare-up comes without warning. But the truth is that the body is not failing. It is reacting. It is signaling. It is asking for relief from a cycle that has been overlooked for too long. The moment you understand this cycle, something powerful changes. You stop seeing hemorrhoids as an isolated problem. You stop seeing slow digestion as bad luck. You begin to see the system as a whole, a chain in which inflammation is the first link, and when you address that first link, the entire chain begins to loosen. And that brings us to the most important part of this journey, the moment where the cycle can finally be broken and your body can begin to return to the rhythm it was always meant to have. When you bring all the pieces together, everything becomes clear. The inflammation that has been slowing your digestion and worsening your hemorrhoids was never random, never isolated, and never a simple inconvenience. It was a signal, a quiet, persistent message from the body that something deeper needed attention. Silent inflammation may begin in the gut lining, triggered by imbalance, stress, or irritation, but its effects reach far beyond digestion. It alters the movement of the intestines, disrupts the natural flow of blood, tightens the pelvic muscles, and ultimately reshapes the entire experience of eating, digesting, and eliminating. This is why the discomfort feels so interconnected. Why bloating appears on the same days that bowel movements become difficult. Why abdominal heaviness is followed by rectal pressure. Why hemorrhoids flare exactly when digestion slows. These sensations aren't separate events. They are consequences of the same internal story, a story written by inflammation that has been progressing quietly, layer by layer, until the symptoms could no longer be ignored. But the most important part of this story is that it is not permanent. The cycle that keeps inflammation alive can be interrupted. The tension in the pelvic floor can ease. The veins can regain their natural rhythm. The gut lining can rebuild itself. And digestion, which once felt heavy and out of sync, can return to a state of smoothness and freedom that you may have forgotten was possible. The body is not a machine that breaks down. It is a living system designed to recover when given the right conditions. When you begin reducing the inflammation at its source, everything downstream begins to change. Meals feel lighter, gas moves more easily, bowel movements become more natural and less painful. The pressure that once pushed downward starts to lift, and the veins that have been working under strain finally get the chance to rest. Little by little, discomfort fades, swelling decreases, and the body begins to feel like it belongs to you again. Understanding what caused this inflammation is the first and most important step, because once you recognize the pattern, you stop treating symptoms separately and start supporting the entire system. You see digestion not as an isolated function, but as part of a complex relationship between the gut, the blood vessels, the nervous system, and the muscles that guide elimination. And that understanding gives you power, the power to make choices that help your body recover gently and naturally. Here at Relief Health, our mission is to help you recognize those patterns, understand your symptoms, and support your body in ways that create real change. If this video helped you see the connection between inflammation, digestion, and hemorrhoids more clearly, then you've already begun your transformation. To continue learning, healing, and rebuilding your digestive health with clarity and confidence, subscribe to Relief Health. Every week, we share videos that bring you closer to the calm, flowing, energized body you deserve. And always remember, when inflammation softens, digestion recovers. And when digestion recovers, your entire body breathes again.